So the first thing to talk about inside Unity is that Unity uses a file structure that is based upon probably similar structures to a lot of other kinds of game engines, but we'll just sort of describe it. So hopefully this is a reasonably illustrative example here. So basically the red rectangle represents the project. In other words, the project contains everything that is inside it, effectively. The project contains the things that are permanent inside your whole game. So this means all of your 3D models, your textures, your materials, of course, your sound files, things that are called prefabs, which are basically prefabricated objects, game objects that you can actually put inside the project so that you can then reuse them in a number of different kinds of ways. That's a really powerful thing, because then basically you can just edit the characteristics of the prefab and it will go to every copy inside the game automatically, so you don't have to edit every single copy. I mean, so for example, you can set up a characteristics of a box, and then you can just create a bunch of copies of a box, and then you can alter your prefab box object, and then everything will go over to the copies. You can create folders, which is useful for organization, and every project is going to contain a scene, usually. One scene or more. So the scene is equivalent to a game level. And the game level is... the scene file itself is sort of semi-permanent, but what's inside the scene is basically temporary. It's going to change constantly. For example, if I have a robot and I shoot the robot disappears from the scene. And if, for example, I shoot some object and then it blows up, then what happens is that object disappears from the scene, and then another object called an explosion appears in its place. So these are all dynamic things that happen inside the scene. Every scene is going to contain one, or probably hundreds, of game objects. A game object is also a temporary object, so it also is going to go away. It can be deleted, it can be, changed in all kinds of ways during the game, and so it's definitely a transitory product essentially. But every game object is going to have a component to it, or many components really, and each component is basically a type of behavior, effectively. And so, but you can have behaviors that change the what's called the transform, which is the basically the position, the rotation, and the scale or size of the object. You can have things that obviously play audio, for example. So there's a lot of different kinds of components that you can have, and they are referred to as components. And so there will be lots of game objects, and all of those game objects will have components. So to go on to the next slide, Unity does what it does through what are called views. So this is where things get a little bit tricky, because as soon as I do this, then the thing disappears, but whatever. So all of these little areas that you see inside the Unity application are referred to as views. Okay, so this is the hierarchy view, the project view, over here the inspector view. If I choose an object, then the inspector view is showing me the characteristics of the object. So hopefully, I don't know if this will make sense here. So the project view, of course, we get to see our 3D modules, our textures, our materials, our sounds, our prefabs, our folders, and our scene files. And then in our scenes, these relate to the hierarchy view. These are the list of the game objects, and the hierarchy view is over here. You'll notice there's no folders in it. It's just a list of a bunch of items, essentially. But it also contains a scene view, which is the 3D game world, and this is where you're going to place all of your game objects. And this is, of course, what we have to get around it. And this is probably one of the hardest things to deal with inside learning how to deal with Unity, is how to get around physically inside the game space. If you've played various games in which you've manipulated cameras in a 3D world, then you're probably you have a very good leg up in figuring this out. But if you haven't dealt with this and all you've been dealing with is just two-dimensional programs like Photoshop or whatever like that, this is going to be a little bit of a trip, because it takes a little bit of expertise to kind of move around and find things and select them, and you can accidentally select things that you didn't want to select. My favorite thing to do is to select an object like so and press the F key. The F key basically frames this object and automatically makes it so that I can go here.